So my name is Shane Russell. I'm a software engineer, and I'm going to talk about a place where I've found that I could be salt and light in the world, and that's the United States federal government. So basically, every part of the federal government is run off of the back of software. So every Medicare claim, every green card that's issued, every income tax form you file, every disability check that goes to a veteran, all of that runs off the back of a lot of software. And it's a lot of software that can tend to be old and a little bit creaky. Also, the government spends a lot of money on this software. They spent about $94.1 billion on IT in 2017. That number is growing. They buy it, they build it, they maintain it, and it doesn't always go very well. So only 6.4% of software projects in a study done by Standish, the Standish Management Group, were found to be successful from the period of 2003 through 2012. And this is particularly software projects that had a budget of over $10 million. 52% of those projects were found to be over budget. They didn't have the right features, they didn't work. And then 41% of those projects just outright failed. There was no result, basically. So they were just wastes of money. And saving taxpayer dollars and so forth is important. But really, it's quotes like these that bring home the importance of this. So it's really easy to lose sight of the fact that people's lives hang in the balance of the government processes that these systems support. So my project is at the Department of Veteran Affairs, or the VA, as it's called. And we interview veterans when we're building our products. And when we hear stuff like this, it's extremely powerful. And at that point, it's not really just numbers anymore. It's people's stories and it's people's lives. So to get some insight into how we can maybe make this better, I'm going to share with you a story about maybe the most successful technology product ever to come out of the VA. And it started in 1977 when they hired a pair of computer nerds, Ted O'Neill and Marty Johnson, to see whether a new academic programming language could be used as the foundation for a system that might connect a lot of the VA hospitals. And instead of going through the multi-year, multi-million-dollar approval process for typical VA projects, they decided to just kind of get to work. And they found some doctors who were willing to work with them, and they would build software. They'd release it. They'd get the doctor's feedback, and they'd iterate. And they would just deploy it. They didn't wait till it was perfect. And doctors, because they had input in it, they loved it. And if that process of building software sounds familiar to you, it's actually kind of Agile before Agile really had a name. And the system that they built was called Vista, and it was one of the first electronic medical record systems ever created. And it's still one of the most highly rated by doctors. And the teams that built Vista, they called themselves the Hard Hats. They were extremely passionate, and they were quite gutsy. And the fact that they were ignoring all the official paperwork and processes of the VA was ruffling a lot of feathers. And to add insult to injury, they were achieving results faster and cheaper than any of the other more official projects at the VA at that time. And these are projects that had maybe tens or hundreds of times more funding. So in typical government fashion, in 1979, they shut the project down. VA leadership ordered Vista to no longer be developed. A lot of the hard hats were fired, and their offices were closed. But Vista survived. The doctors and hospitals loved the product so much that they housed hard hats in their own hospitals to continue to work on the project behind the back of the leadership. And they would have these secret calls on Mondays where all these teams in disparate hospitals would work together and collaborate on this stuff. And there's these stories of people driving these laundry basket-sized computers because on Moore's Law, we're a little bit further back in 1979. They're driving, these laundry basket-sized computers across the country in order to share their code. And yeah, at the internet at that time could only transmit 300 words per minute, which doesn't get you a lot of code. And these hard hats, they weren't really motivated by money, really. They weren't motivated by stock options or higher salaries. The government pretty much has a standard pay bracket for their type of work. They were motivated by principle, and they were willing to risk their careers for it. And eventually that paid off. In 1981, the VA leadership couldn't really ignore the impact that Vista was having, and they decided to officially support it as the official electronic medical record of the VA. It didn't just stop at the VA, though. The hard hats also fought to open source the source code of Vista, and through this law called the Freedom of Information Act. And after that, many state and national governments around the world began to deploy installations of Vista. So Mexico, Iraq, Finland, Germany, Kenya, Nigeria, Egypt, Malaysia, Brazil, Denmark. These are all countries that have deployed or currently use Vista to run their medical systems. This is a picture of a Nigerian doctor in 1993 using Vista. But the fire didn't last forever. The demands of Vista eventually outgrew its scrappy origins. Incidents over the years, like in 2005, when a burglar stole a Vista server chock full of PII out of an engineer's house, invoked more bureaucracy, more paperwork to mitigate all of these risks. And restructuring of power within the VA stripped Vista from the control of the hospitals to the control of a centralized IT department. And the combination of these new management and new burdensome processes drove away the passionate types of developers who built it. And then the development on Vista during that time became increasingly slow and inexpensive. So let's fast forward to 2013. The government had just spent $1.5 billion on healthcare.gov. And for about the first 2 months after its launch, it was virtually unusable. As a desperate attempt to fix this problem, the Obama administration brought in what was called a tech surge. Engineers from startups and large tech companies alike dropped what they were doing and came to Maryland in order to try and fix the problem. And the magnitude of the crisis kind of gave these developers the leverage to ignore a lot of the paperwork and bureaucracy that was typically there. And they succeeded. Once the damage was under control, they reflected on the state of technology in the government and how effective it was to have motivated engineers, unrestrained by bureaucratic barriers, working to restore healthcare.gov. And in August of 2014, they decided to create an agency of the White House called the United States Digital Service. And this would recruit skilled technologists to come work on the nation's top priorities. Which brings us back to the VA. This is a screenshot of, vets.gov, and that was in service of one of the biggest priorities, which is getting veterans disability benefits. And so we also built tools to help run the VA more effectively. And in our work, we try to channel the energy and the passion of hard hats while learning from their mistakes. And we aren't really driving servers across the country either. And they're not that big. They're like thumb drives. And so we work side by side with VA caseworkers, attorneys, and judges to design tools to help them process applications faster and more accurately. And this is a screenshot of Caseflow, which is the project that I lead. And it's a tool that helps attorneys process really, really complicated VA disability benefits files. And we iterate really quickly, and we deploy new code every day instead of every 3 months, like sort of the government really wants you to do. And we make sure our code is supported by best practices. So maybe unlike Vista, it will withstand the test of time and might still be working after hopefully a decade and maybe more. And another thing is when we first got to the VA, we wanted to deploy our code in the cloud. And they said, unless you can put it in an evidence bag, you can't do it. And instead, they wanted us to deploy our application on a server, which would cost $250,000 a year for a single server. And we couldn't do it. I basically told them, unless that comes with like a butler who's going to type in all my commands for me, I'm not paying that much money for a server. And so we fought for 2 years and eventually got the cloud approved at the VA. And now we have about 250 servers that cost $100,000 a year to run. And like Vista, all of our application code is open source. So any other government or agency can learn or contribute to the work that we're doing. So to close this up, there's a saying that we say a lot at USDS, no one is coming, it's up to us. Don't read too far into that, because as a Christian, I obviously believe there's one particular person who's coming eventually. But I think this quote kind of gets at the temptation of a particular temptation of working in the government, maybe even more so than a lot of the private sector. And that temptation is to really not want to rock the boat and not want to realize our own agency in helping solve some of these really big and important problems. And it's easy to really push the blame onto someone else. Like, I only do this, and they're supposed to deal with it, and everyone is blaming everyone else. But I kind of realized over the years that I've worked here that if we're going to improve government technology, it's not going to be on the shoulders of a single president or a secretary, because as I've learned in my 3 years there, those things come and go. It's going to be on the shoulders of hundreds, if not thousands, of really, really passionate technologists that are willing to put their personal welfare on the line to serve the American people. So that's my talk.